When Lucas moved in, he said it like a rule, not a reassurance. Just roommates. I nodded, even though no one had asked me to promise anything. The apartment was already furnished with silence when he arrived, my silence. I had lived alone long enough to arrange my days into habits that didn't require explanation. Coffee at 6, work until late, evenings with the lights low and the television on mute. Lucas disrupted none of that at first. He slipped into the spare room with a duffel bag, a guitar he never played, and a grin that felt too warm for the narrow hallway. Lucas had a way of making space feel shared without touching anything. He asked before using my mugs. He labeled his food. He apologized for noise that never bothered me. If I noticed him more than I should have, it was because he was hard not to notice, careful, attentive, present. Still, we were just roommates. That was the line. I repeated it whenever my thoughts wandered too far. He told me about Mark on the second night. We were standing in the kitchen, the refrigerator humming between us like a mediator. Mark was his boyfriend, long distance, complicated, important. Lucas said the name casually, but he watched my face when he did, as if checking for a reaction. I gave him none. I congratulated him on finding someone who made him smile the way he claimed Mark did. After that, Mark became a background presence, a voice on speakerphone, a notification lighting up Lucas's screen. I learned the cadence of their conversations without meaning to. I learned when Lucas was happy and when he was merely polite. I learned to leave the room when Mark called, though Lucas never asked me to. Our routines settled quickly. We cooked together on weekends because it made sense to share groceries. We talked while we ate, about work, about the city, about nothing that mattered enough to hurt. Lucas laughed easily, but his laughter faded faster than it should have. I noticed the quiet afterward. I told myself noticing was harmless. Sometimes he stayed up late at the dining table, laptop open, fingers still. I passed by on my way to bed and asked if he was okay. He always said yes, just tired. I believed him because believing was easier than pressing. We were just roommates. Concern didn't violate that, but concern turned into familiarity, and familiarity into something softer. I learned how he took his coffee, no sugar, too much milk. He learned I hated small talk in the mornings. He stopped trying. When he came home frustrated, he sat on the couch instead of pacing his room. When I came home exhausted, he offered leftovers without asking questions. We didn't discuss the shift. We let it happen quietly, the way things change when no one is watching. One evening, Mark's name lit up Lucas's phone while we were watching a movie neither of us cared about. Lucas muted the television but didn't answer. The phone kept vibrating, insistently patient. He stared at it, then placed it face down on the table. I said nothing. He said nothing. The movie ended without either of us noticing. "I'll call him later," Lucas said, finally. It sounded like an apology, though I wasn't sure who it was for. That night, after he went to his room, I sat alone and replayed the moment until it lost its shape. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself that being attentive didn't make me complicit in anything. Just roommates, just a shared couch, just a temporary arrangement, yet the apartment felt different, heavier with unspoken awareness. I caught myself listening for Lucas's footsteps, measuring my evenings by the sound of his door. I wondered when his lease ended and hated myself for the thought. I wondered if Mark could hear the pauses in Lucas's voice the way I could. A week later, Lucas asked if I wanted to have dinner together instead of separately. The question was ordinary. The way he waited for my answer was not. "Sure," I said. I didn't know why my chest tightened as if I'd agreed to something else entirely. We ate at the small table, knees almost touching. He talked about work, about stress, about how hard it was to feel understood when the person you loved wasn't there. I listened too closely. I offered sympathy that came too naturally. When he thanked me, his eyes lingered, searching. For a moment, I thought he might say something that would force us to name what was happening. He didn't. He smiled instead, soft and grateful, and cleared the plates. As I watched him move around the kitchen like he belonged there, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. Whatever rules we thought we were following had already begun to blur. We were still calling it just roommates. But the apartment no longer believed us. After that dinner, Lucas stopped pretending our evenings were accidental. He began waiting for me to get home, the kitchen light left on like a quiet signal. We ate together more often than not, our conversations stretching past the point where dishes should have been cleared. He asked questions that required thought, not politeness. I answered them with more honesty than I usually allowed anyone. Mark's name came up less, and when it did, it carried weight. Lucas no longer spoke about him casually. The stories were edged with frustration, missed calls, misunderstood messages, the strain of distance that turned affection into obligation. I listened, aware of the line beneath my feet and how close I was to crossing it. I told myself I was being supportive, not involved. The distinction felt thinner each day. One night, Lucas sat beside me on the couch instead of across the room. The shift was small, almost reasonable. He leaned back, exhaled, and stared at the ceiling as if searching for answers there. I kept my eyes on the blank television screen, afraid that meeting his gaze would reveal too much. "I don't know how to explain this without sounding ungrateful," he said. "Mark loves me, I know that, but sometimes it feels like he loves a version of me that doesn't exist anymore. I should have redirected the conversation. I should have reminded him of boundaries, of loyalty, of the simplicity of our arrangement. Instead, I asked what he meant. The question slipped out before I could stop it, an invitation disguised as concern. Lucas turned toward me then. His expression wasn't dramatic, just tired. "With you," he said slowly, "I don't have to perform. I don't have to explain why I'm quiet or distracted. You just notice." The word landed heavily between us. Notice. It was intimate in a way touch didn't need to be. I felt a pull I didn't name, a recognition that unsettled me more than desire ever had. I told him that everyone wanted to be understood, that it didn't mean anything beyond that. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. But after that night, Lucas talked to me before he talked to Mark. He shared small disappointments and larger doubts, trusting me with thoughts he no longer offered his boyfriend. I became the first person he sought when something went wrong, the one he checked in with when something went right. Each time, I told myself I hadn't asked for this. Each time, I made space for it anyway. I began to anticipate his moods by the way he closed the door. I knew when to joke and when to listen. I knew when to say nothing at all. The apartment adjusted around us, rearranging itself to accommodate the gravity pulling us closer. We never acknowledged it. Silence became our shield. One evening, Mark called while we were cooking. Lucas glanced at his phone, hesitated, then answered. I busied myself at the sink, water running louder than necessary. I heard fragments, apologies, explanations, promises that sounded rehearsed. When Lucas hung up, he stood very still, as if bracing for impact. "He thinks I'm pulling away," Lucas said. I turned off the faucet. "Are you?" The question hung there, unprotected. Lucas met my eyes, and for a moment, he looked frightened by his own honesty. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just know that when I'm here, I can breathe." The words were not a confession, but they carried the same danger. I felt the weight of them settle into me, reshaping something I had tried to keep intact. I should have stepped back. I should have reminded him of Mark, of promises made elsewhere. Instead, I said nothing, and my silence did more damage than any encouragement could have. From then on, our conversations grew quieter, more charged. There were pauses that stretched too long, glances that lingered before being quickly withdrawn. We laughed less easily, as if laughter might expose what we were avoiding. The closeness was no longer comfortable, it was magnetic. Late one night, Lucas sat at the table, head in his hands. I asked what was wrong, already knowing the answer would matter more than it should. "I feel like I'm living two different lives," he said. "And I'm tired of pretending they don't touch." I felt the truth of that statement echo through me. Whatever line we had sworn not to cross was no longer visible. We were standing in its place, balanced on a choice neither of us was ready to name. As I went to bed that night, I understood something with unsettling clarity. Even without a single touch, even without a word spoken aloud, we had already begun betraying someone. And the worst part was how natural it felt. The night it changed didn't announce itself. There was no dramatic build-up, no warning that we were about to lose whatever control we still believed we had. It began like most evenings did by then, quiet, familiar, deceptively safe. Lucas came home later than usual, rain clinging to his jacket, his hair damp and curling at the edges. He looked worn down in a way that had nothing to do with work. I asked if he wanted dinner. He shook his head and sat at the table instead, shoulders slumped, hands folded as if he were waiting for judgment. Mark and I talked, he said. I didn't sit down. I leaned against the counter, grounding myself in the cold surface. How did it go? Lucas let out a breath that sounded like surrender. He asked me if there's someone else. The words struck harder than I expected. My first instinct was denial, even though neither of us said my name. I told myself that honesty still existed, that nothing irreversible had happened. Lucas watched me closely, as if my reaction mattered more than the question itself. What did you say? I asked. I told him no, Lucas replied. Because I don't know what this is. He gestured vaguely between us, and the space felt suddenly charged, no longer neutral ground. I sat down then, the distance shrinking without permission. The rain tapped against the windows, steady and enclosing, turning the apartment inward. We talked for hours, stripping the conversation of small talk and excuses. Lucas spoke about feeling unseen, about how the distance with Mark had turned love into something procedural. I listened, aware that every word drew us closer to a truth we had avoided naming. When it was my turn to speak, I surprised myself by not retreating. I didn't plan for this, I said. I didn't expect to care the way I do. The admission hung there, fragile and exposed. Lucas didn't interrupt. He didn't look away. His stillness felt like permission. I feel different around you, he said quietly. And that scares me. The honesty between us was no longer safe, but it was real. We sat closer now, knees brushing, neither of us pulling back. The contact was brief, almost accidental, yet it sent a jolt through me that erased the last of my rationalizations. This was no longer something happening to us. We were choosing it. Lucas reached for his phone, then stopped. If I call him tonight, he said, I'll lie again. If I don't, I'm still lying. I didn't answer. I didn't know which silence was worse. The rain intensified, the city outside blurred into indistinct shapes. It felt as though the world had narrowed to this room, this moment, this decision neither of us wanted to make first. Lucas stood and began pacing, then stopped in front of me. His voice dropped. I don't know who I am when I'm with him anymore. The confession cut through whatever distance remained. I stood too, close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the conflict written plainly across his face. I should have stepped away. Instead, I stayed where I was, accepting the closeness as if it were inevitable. This isn't fair, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. I know, Lucas replied. But it's honest. That was the word that undid us. Honest. It reframed everything we had been doing, stripping away the excuses and leaving only intention. Lucas reached out, stopping just short of touching me, his hand suspended in uncertainty. I could have ended it then. I didn't. When his hand finally settled against my arm, the contact was gentle, almost questioning. I felt the weight of it settle into me, not as desire alone but as recognition. We didn't rush. We didn't pretend it was anything other than what it was, a line crossed with open eyes. Afterward, we sat in silence, the intimacy heavier than the act itself. Lucas pulled away first, running a hand through his hair, already retreating into consequence. This doesn't erase anything, he said. It just makes it real. I nodded, unable to argue. Whatever had shifted couldn't be undone, no matter how carefully we tried to contain it. The apartment felt different now, marked by something irreversible. Later, as I lay awake in my room, I listened to the rain fade into quiet. I understood that nothing about our lives would fit the same way again. The comfort we had built was gone, replaced by truth and the cost that came with it. In the next room, Lucas moved, restless. Morning was coming, and with it, everything we had avoided deciding. Morning arrived without ceremony. No storm, no dramatic light, just the quiet persistence of daylight pressing through the curtains, illuminating what we could no longer ignore. I lay awake longer than necessary, listening for signs of movement from Lucas's room, bracing myself for the sound of a door that would confirm everything had changed. When I finally stepped into the kitchen, Lucas was already there. He stood at the counter with a mug cradled in both hands, staring into it as if the answer to everything might be waiting at the bottom. He looked up when he heard me, and the expression on his face, tired, guarded, unmistakably sober, told me he remembered everything. Hey, he said. It was the simplest word, stripped of the warmth it used to carry. I returned it anyway and reached for my own mug, grateful for something to do with my hands. The apartment felt unfamiliar, as if the walls had shifted overnight to accommodate a truth neither of us had planned for. We stood in silence until Lucas spoke again. I didn't sleep. Neither did I admitted. He nodded, unsurprised. The quiet stretched, heavy but necessary. This was not a moment to rush. Whatever came next deserved to be faced fully awake. I keep thinking about Mark, Lucas said finally. About what I owe him. The name settled between us like a boundary reasserting itself. I felt a flicker of relief that he said it first, followed quickly by guilt for feeling relieved at all. This was the cost we had avoided until now. You owe him honesty, I said. The words came easily, even though they implicated me. Whatever that looks like. Lucas's mouth tightened. And what do I owe you? The question startled me. I hadn't expected to be included in the equation. I considered the answer carefully, unwilling to claim more than was mine to claim. You don't owe me anything, I said. This happened because we both let it. Lucas studied me, as if searching for something he could hold onto. I don't regret last night, he said slowly. But I don't know how to live with it. I understood that feeling too well. Regret and meaning were not opposites, they often lived side by side. I told him as much, not to comfort him, but because it was true. We talked then, not in fragments or half-confessions, but plainly. Lucas admitted that the relationship with Mark had been unraveling long before I entered the picture. Distance had widened into disconnection, and routine had replaced intimacy. Still, naming that didn't absolve him. He knew it, I knew it. I can't pretend nothing happened, Lucas said. And I can't pretend this is simple. I watched the steam rise from my coffee and disappear. Nothing about it is. There was no dramatic decision, no declaration of love or promise of a future. What passed between us was quieter and harder. Lucas said he needed to talk to Mark, really talk, without evasions. He said he needed time to understand what he had done and why. I told him I would respect whatever distance that required, even if it meant losing what we had built. That was the moment that hurt the most, not the guilt, not the uncertainty, but the acknowledgement that caring didn't guarantee staying. Later that day, Lucas packed a small bag. Not to leave for good, he explained, just to give himself space to think, to speak honestly without hiding behind proximity. I helped him without comment, folding clothes that still carried the familiarity of shared living. Each item felt like punctuation, marking the end of a sentence we hadn't finished writing. At the door, he hesitated. This isn't over, he said. But it won't be the same. I know, I replied. When the door closed behind him, the apartment returned to silence, but it wasn't the same silence I'd lived with before. It was heavier, shaped by memory and consequence. I moved through the room slowly, noticing the absence he left behind and the presence of my own accountability. We had crossed a line and survived it, but survival didn't mean resolution. It meant carrying the truth forward, even when it complicated everything. That night, I sat alone with the lights low, thinking about how easily lives could change without spectacle. How one honest moment could dismantle years of certainty. I didn't know what Lucas would choose, or what that choice would mean for either of us. What I did know was this: whatever came next would be built on truth, not denial. And that knowledge, unsettling as it was, felt like the only real beginning we had left.